Welcome, everybody. Happy Tuesday. I almost said Thursday, jumped ahead because I don't know what day it is, probably like most of you. My name's Dave Gorin, another of our continuing education series seminars. Today it's Making It to the Majors, and happy to be joined by Melanie Newman, Noah Eagle, and Geoff Arnold. Geoff and Melanie are new members of the Baltimore Orioles broadcast team, and Noah, his first year as radio play-by-play voice of the LA Clippers. Are we in hiatus, Noah? Is that the deal? Is that what we're calling it?
Hiatus is the official terminology. I saw a fellow NBA broadcaster, John Fockey, logged on, so I always got a shout-out, part of the fraternity, if you will. But yes, we are still awaiting a return to play.
And hopefully that will come sooner rather than later, although I'm not holding my breath. Anyway, thanks everybody for joining us today. I know most familiar faces, including our chair of the board, Diane Blix, just joined us. Hi, Diane.
Hello, Dave. How are you?
Good. So everybody has a different path in this business, and we're going to start with each of our three panelists telling their paths. And Melanie, since you are top left corner of my screen, that makes you number one. So tell us about your path to where you are today.
Sure. Well, my path didn't know that this was its path. I thought I would be a teacher or a veterinarian for a long time, and slowly found my voice, thought it was print journalism, and then in college was convinced to try broadcasting. From there, thought it'll be studio work and hosting, and we'll take care of that. But instead, it ended up getting a chance to go do sideline work, and thought, I don't know that this is for me, or this is a certain thing that I want to do. And I got challenged again to try it and to see what changes that I could make in that field. And after that, I fell in love with live reporting, started pursuing sideline work. And by the time I graduated college, had a couple of false starts in jobs. And over a year and a half after I got my diploma, I graduated, thought this was surely the end of the road. My time had expired. The degree was turning to dust. Got an opportunity to join a minor league team where I've spent 6 years in the minors, and also doing a ton of college work on the sides. It's called last year, my first year as a lead play-by-play broadcaster for the Salem Red Sox, who are the advanced affiliate to the Boston Red Sox, building all of our digital content. I mean, it was really whatever I had the energy to create and give back to fans. And whatever it was, Baltimore saw value in it. They liked the fact that a lot of us that are up and coming have the ability to fill multiple roles and want to really give fans multiple different avenues to connect with these teams and these athletes. And so late February, I got the phone call and was really blessed and honored to accept that role with the Orioles.
Great. And for those who tuned in late, this is the day I met Melanie on the sidelines at the Birmingham Bowl in December of 2018. So I thought that was appropriate. Geoff Arnold, you are a compatriot of Melanie's now. I know a little bit about your path because you were here in Winston-Salem for a time, but tell everybody else how you got to Baltimore.
Yeah, my path's a little bit more unusual, is pretty unusual as well, I guess. I started broadcasting when I was in college. I didn't know there was something I ever was going to do. I went to a liberal arts school where I thought I might be an attorney. And when I did an internship with a judge over the course of a summer, I realized that the best part of the internship was lunch. So when I realized that, I was like, this isn't going to be a good fit. So I got into doing stuff with the student radio station, and being where I went to school is just like a liberal arts school. A lot of kids didn't really want to do it, so I got lots of reps. A lot of them were probably really bad, but it was still a cool opportunity where I got to do lots of games and do a lot of different sports. And eventually, once I got out of college, before I went into broadcasting full time, I umpired professional baseball for a year. So I did affiliated minor league baseball for one season. Learned a lot from that experience, really got a great understanding of the rules, attention to detail, and I got to see the game from a perspective that I don't think a whole lot of people do. But after I spent the fall working with Dave over here at IMG and working on the Wake Forest broadcast and then also working on a lot of other broadcast at IMG, doing a little bit of play-by-play work. It was my wake-up call that this is probably something I'd like to do instead. And so I went from there to Frisco, Texas to start my minor league broadcasting career doing baseball. I was fortunate that my buddy Alex Bispoli had gotten an opportunity in Frisco, and he got hired pretty late. And I think he was looking for somebody that he knew and that could make the experience for him a little bit easier, just because he was brand new there and I was going to be brand new too. So I worked with him, was very bad in my first year, but gradually got better as the year went on, and then kind of jumped from minor league stop to minor league stop. It was in Frederick, which is an Orioles affiliate in the Carolina League, so that's where I met Mel. And also did a lot of work with doing some college football on television, and then doing some college basketball on television. Doing that, some games were on RSNs. I did some stuff with a major market station in DC, working with 106.7 The Fan. And then in November of this past year, having worked with the Orioles for a while, they reached out about an opportunity to possibly join their broadcast team. And once we got into January, that's when things started to heat up. They decided to bring me on board, and I'm pretty blessed to have the opportunity to join them, and hopefully we're going to have baseball pretty soon.
One of the things I should have insisted upon was you got to give your alma mater a shout out when you talk about it. So Geoff?
Well, Dickinson College is my alma mater.
Right. And Melanie?
I went to Troy University.
And the real reason I said that is because Noah Eagle's up next. Noah, where did you go to school?
Yes, broadcast review, Syracuse University. Before I start, I do want to know, Geoff, did you have like a signature strike three call? Because when you were an umpire, because I'm always interested in how everybody puts their own twist on it.
Yeah, I did the bow and arrow, so I would do the raise it up and then punch it out, kind of Mortal Kombat style, I guess.
That's one of my favorite. That's my favorite ways to call it. So I'm glad you went there. Dave, yes, Syracuse I owe a great deal to what I learned there, and Matt Park joined the call. I've talked with Matt before and mentioned this before to him, and I will mention it forever, that I'm extremely grateful for everything that he did for me and really all of us while we were at Syracuse. But my story starts early. The last name kind of gives it away. My father's Iron Eagle, and for my entire life, since I was just an idea in his head, he's been doing this at a professional level as a broadcaster. And he started with the New Jersey Nets as a play-by-play broadcaster in '94, but he was at WFAN here in New York before that. Really, 3 days after he graduated college, he started at WFAN behind the scenes, running the board, producing shows, and eventually worked his way up on the air. And so for me, just being around it was almost as if it was osmosis-like. It just kind of got into my blood, and I watched it and I ingested it and I learned about it just from being around it. And people always used to ask me, is it weird to see your dad on TV or hear him on the radio? And I always said, no, it would be no different if my dad was a surgeon and I just watched him operate on somebody, or if he was an accountant and I watched him do taxes for something like that. That's just how it was. It was just normal. And so for me, when I was really young, because when I say when I was young, people usually laugh in my face because I'm currently young. But when I say I'm really young, when I'm like 6, 7 years old, people would say, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I had an answer ready to go. And some of you may have already heard this story, but I would look someone dead in the eye, and most kids would say, I want to be a cowboy. I want to be an astronaut, something cool. I clearly was not cool at all, because I said, deadpan face, I want to be a TV dentist. And I don't know if any of you know what that is. If you do, good for you, because it doesn't exist. And I thought maybe if I combine like Dr. Phil with dentistry, it would work, but I can't grow a mustache like Dr. Phil, and people get freaked out by looking at other people's mouths. So it was a bad idea. And so when I was maybe 12, 13 years old, I lasered in on trying to follow the footsteps of what was in front of me, of what my father did. And ever since then, I had focused on it. I didn't really do anything with it up until I got to college. And once I chose Syracuse, I realized everything was there for the taking. And it was up to me to go out and carve my own path and leave my own legacy at a school like that has such an impressive one. And so I got involved as much as I could. I did everything I could. And there's another professor there named Olivia Stomsky who had some contacts out in LA. She's still pretty active in the industry behind the scenes, and they reached out to her last year. And look, I'll be honest with you, and I would say that any of us would. I was extremely fortunate to just kind of be at the right place at the right time and know the right people. And again, having the last name did not hurt. But for me, so basically what happened was Professor Stomsky reached out to me and said, hey, can you send me a reel of all of your basketball work and a resume? Because some people are interested. And I didn't realize, she didn't tell me who it was from, who was interested. She just wanted me to send it to her. So I did. And a couple weeks go by, maybe even a couple months, I heard nothing. And out of nowhere, I was driving in my car to a radio show I'd been doing on a Monday night. And I got a call, and it was from Nick Davis out in Fox Sports West telling me that they were looking to replace Ralph Lawler, who had been the voice of the Clippers for 40 years. And my name came up, and they wanted me to fly out to interview and audition. And I sat in my car, and I nearly crashed that car, but I sat in there and said, who? What? And he said, yes, we want you to fly out and interview and audition in LA next week. So I said, okay. And I was still finishing on my senior year. And so I flew out. I interviewed. I auditioned with Corey Maggette, who was one of my favorite players growing up. I loved Corey Maggette, and he's a great dude. And I had to take a red eye back to Syracuse to get back for either an exam or something. And I got back, and one of my agents reached out to me and said, hey, Steve Ballmer wants to meet you next week, the owner of the team. And so I flew back out to the West Coast the following week to Seattle. I interviewed with Steve Ballmer for about an hour and a half, one-on-one. And as we were leaving the interview, I said, Mr. Ballmer, I really appreciate the opportunity. I just want to let you know that if I get this job, the Clippers will be my life. He said, good to know. Thank you for coming in. About another week goes by to take another red eye back to Syracuse. I finish up, I graduate. I flew to Chicago for the NBA B-League Elite Camp and Draft Lottery. Flew back to Syracuse, drove home. And the next day after I had moved all my stuff out and officially got back to New Jersey, I got a call from our team president, Gillian Zucker, saying that the radio position, Brian Seaman, who had been doing the radio for the Clippers for the last decade plus, was moving up and replacing Ralph on the TV side, and they wanted to offer me the radio position and said, take the weekend to think about it. I was like, what? No, oh, I'll take it out. Yes. But I took the weekend and called her back and said I'd be more than happy to take it and move out, and I've been really happy.
So here's what I've learned so far. The four most depressing words in the English language are red eye back to Syracuse. Tell me what you learned from your path, Noah.
I would say a couple things. And, you know, Matt was around for all 4 of my years at Syracuse, and he might be able to attest to this. But when you have somebody who's done this, and my father had done it my entire life at a high level, I didn't want people to look at me, at least originally, as just Iron Eagle's son. And I still don't. I want to carve my own path. But when I got to Syracuse for those first couple years, certainly my freshman and sophomore year, when people would introduce themselves to me, I would introduce myself as, hi, I'm Noah. I would not attach the last name to it. And eventually, by the time I would say I was at least into my junior year, I realized there's nothing wrong with being an Eagle or having the name. There was nothing wrong with it. And again, I acknowledge how fortunate I am to have a father that is in the industry, that's well respected and is well liked by other people. I know how fortunate I am to have contacts through Syracuse that maybe have gotten me those opportunities. But once I got those opportunities, it was up to me to make the most of them. And so with the Clippers, once I got the interview and the audition, then it was on me to go out and showcase who I was and how I was going to do the job and basically convince them that I was their guy. And so I've held that, I would say, certainly from junior year of college on, this idea of I don't care if someone looks at me and says, well, he's only here because of his name. So be it. I'm going to go out and do the best job I possibly can and prove that, yeah, I work really hard. I'm not saying I work any harder than anybody else because I know everybody in the industry does. But I also want to prove that because of the opportunities I've been afforded, I'm hoping I can do a good enough job to prove that maybe the next person who's 23 or 24 years old deserves that same opportunity. My dad got his big break with the Nets just before he was turning 25. And so he made it work. I feel I can make it work. There are other people that have. And so the big thing that I want to do is almost pay it forward by showing that it's possible and showing that you can trust somebody at a young age.
Great. How about you, Geoff?
I would say
from your path.
Lessons from my path. I would say that relationships are incredibly important in doing this. I think most of us know that. It kind of goes without saying. I think a big reason why I got this opportunity was that the person that was hiring me and the people that I work with now, I've known most of them for 5-6 years. And I'd say that I know a lot of these people just as much on a personal level as I do on a professional level. And just, I think, them realizing that I'm somebody that they get along with, that I work well with them. I was in their minor league pipeline, so that I don't think hurt. I had a lot of interactions with them. I think I knew what I was getting from them, and I think they knew what they were getting from me. And I definitely think that made a big difference when the opportunity presented itself. Another thing is, for me, I probably would say that I'm more of a level by level kind of person. I probably am somebody that it might take me a little bit longer to get to a point where I'm ready for a big opportunity or a bigger opportunity. But I think I learned that everybody's path is different. We're all kind of on our own timelines, and that to try and compare ourselves to somebody else and to focus on what somebody else is doing. If we can learn from each other, I think that's the most important thing. But getting caught up too much in somebody else's story and what they're doing and why did this guy get this job and why didn't I get this job? Like I think having that dialogue isn't very productive. The most important thing that I figured is if I can just get a little bit better with every broadcast that I do, that's going to make a huge difference. And that's the one thing that I am in control of. I mean, how do I prep? How do I focus on this thing that I'm trying to work on when I just listened to the tape of my last broadcast and it maybe didn't go quite the way that I wanted it to, or I'm hearing this, or I'm sticking to this crutch phrase too much. So just focusing on that. And then also finding people in your network that you know are going to be honest with you and that are going to tell you the truth. And I'm pretty fortunate that I've got, and I sort of call it my lifetime board of advisors, a group of folks that are different ages, have different experience levels than me. Some who are older, some who are a lot older, some who are a little older, some who are younger, some who are a lot younger, that can kind of give me perspective from a bunch of different areas. And I also have friends that watch and listen that aren't broadcasters, that hear stuff a different way. And I think being able to understand what people want that maybe don't see things through the lens that we see it through can be really valuable in delivering a good product.
Good advice. You talk about being a level by level guy. When you're down in Class A for how long?
6 years.
6 years. I mean, at some point you're saying to yourself, am I ever going to get out of here? Right?
Yeah, and it's a great point. I guess one takeaway that I had, I was talking to my buddy Geoff Levering, who does the Milwaukee Brewers, and I've talked to a couple other people that are major league broadcasters about this. Like, because I had opportunities to go other places and to do some other things. And I asked, I was like, is this not looking that good right now? Like, does it make a difference for me that I'm here rather than trying to go to a AA or AAA team? And the advice that I got from Geoff, and this is something I think you got from Brian Anderson as well, is there's major league and there's minor league. And the reason why I stayed as long as I did was because I had a lot of freelance opportunities that paid really well, that provided me good experience. So I'd spend time in a smaller market and maybe with a lower level minor league team, but I was in the off season doing work in bigger markets and on bigger platforms. And that was just the best fit for me. I mean, some people might want to try and climb the minor league ladder. And if that's what you want to do, then you have to do what you think is best for you. But the reason I stayed where I did was because it just happened to be the best fit for me. And eventually things ended up working out.
Melanie, you kind of went the opposite way. You went double A, single A, right?
I did. And that was actually kind of funny. When the news first broke of my hiring, was the mass of people who thought that that was the only stop I had. So like, oh, she had a year in single A baseball and now she's up. And that's not it at all. And Geoff made a lot of really good points. And that kind of proves in itself, it doesn't really matter the level of affiliation you're at. It's what you do with it, the resources that are around where you're at, and how you take advantage of utilizing those to make as big of an impact as you can. I got lucky. I was staring at, spring training had started last year and I didn't have a job when the job with the Salem Red Sox had opened up last minute. I jumped on it immediately and kind of no holds barred said, I would love to be a part of this. I'm actively down here in spring training. I can start giving you coverage now. And it was a good fit. And I got really lucky to have that and to have people who supported me, and certainly a team who stood behind understanding, we have a lot of bus rides and there's going to be a girl on the bus and a girl everywhere else. And with that, it's a perfect example of why you have to trust the process, because in the face of having a lot of people for the first time start telling me, well, baseball is about to start and you don't have a job. And I think it's time to hang it up, but I know my work and I know why I'm here. And once I did, like I said, I didn't figure this out really until I was almost through college. But once I did, that was it. There's no backup plans. And you really do have to be fully bought into why you're here and what you're doing. And then make sure that inner circle is just as bought in to promoting that and pushing you to keep going, because there's going to be times where you don't have that in you and you do need somebody who gets it, who's next to you, who's going to kind of get the stick out and say, no, this is not when we stop. This is not when we get discouraged. You keep moving, you keep applying, pack up the car and drive 2,000 miles to a city you've never been to see how the job goes. And I wouldn't change an ounce of any of those experiences that I've had so far. I look back and, I've covered multiple college conferences, multiple schools independently. I've been to dozens of bowl games all over the country, and in addition to baseball. And that's all just trying to make that one dream work as a whole. Something that I loved that was taught to me back in the day by Andy Green when he was our skipper back in Mobile was, if you get a job in this industry, even if it's a little different than what you had in your head, don't turn it down. Because if I'm here as a skipper in Double A, but I get the option, to go to the bigs and be the pitching coach, I'm not going to turn it down because it's the pitching coach. You still have different avenues to make what you want to make happen. You just have to trust them, and you have to trust your own work that you're putting into it, and that you're going to put your best foot forward. And like Geoff said, trusting the people around you who are also going to be honest enough to help you grow your work and to get better in the first place. I actually gave him some credit earlier today. Boog Shambi asked me how had my work grown the most last year at Salem. And I said, Geoff was really the person who took the time not only to sit down and to go over stuff and you hate hearing your own voice in the first place, but he made me do it, but made sure we did it often enough to where there was market improvement and there were pinpoint moments where other people had tried to say, well, this isn't good, change this, but never showed me how to create change and how to improve it. And because of that pooled experience that we have from all these different mentors and people in our life, he was able to pinpoint them exactly and say, by doing this. And that made all the difference in the world. And you have to go out there. I mean, trust the process, which I know is the most overused thing in the book, but it's true and it works. Trust your inner circle. Know that, they need to be honest with you and they need to be supportive at the right times. But at the end of the day, continuing on and making this work is still on your shoulders. And not really letting anything get in your way. Like that Noah mentioned, not letting his name be something that was in his way. A lot of people want to draw attention to, oh, well, you're a female this and you're a female that. I don't really want that to be the attention at this point. I do a good job. I know I can bring value to something. And at the end of the day, that's it. That's all that matters. Yes, I'm going to hear, and I still hear a lot of flack that's about my gender, but it's basically ignorance at the end of it. And it's something that you just have to wipe out because they're not from my inner circle, and it doesn't matter. And you keep going.
How intimidating, or is it intimidating? I mean, it's necessary to ask people to be part of your inner circle, people who aren't yes men, and that, of course, is part of the subject of Thursday's talk with Steve Hers. Don't take yes for an answer is his book. How important was that, and how intimidating for you personally to ask for that help, Mel?
A lot of the relationships that are that close to me, I will say, came pretty organically. And I think you do have to allow that to a degree of just shifting things out. And it doesn't mean that it's anything wrong with that certain person who you don't, slowly integrate into that inner circle. It just means that, maybe you two don't connect on that level that will get through to you. You have to have the philosophies and the emotions that are able to really get together with each other, get on the same ground. Working constructively is huge. And then from that point, it almost just slowly turns into, okay, you're in my inner circle now. I mean, when I met Bob Rathbun, it was because his wife was adopting to us a dog. I didn't know she was his wife. I was still in college, still figuring out the broadcasting role, but she thought it'd be good for us to get together. And so he went from, I'm going to go meet a guy who's got an NBA job and I think the world of him, and let's see what he thinks about my work. And he's family now. I mean, this has been over a decade of mentorship and friendship, and he gets all the Christmas cards and we talk about all of the stuff that doesn't matter at this point. And I think that just drives in how important relationships are, because you only get that inner circle and that level of mentors you trust with your work and your career path when you invest in the relationships. If the only time you talk to people is because you need something, especially if you only need something professionally, they remember that, and it becomes very hollow. And I know that we're all busy and everybody goes through the motions, and I'm the worst at opening a text when I'm doing something and thinking I've read it and then realizing a week later I didn't do anything. But I still get back to them. And even if it's just, hey, how are you? Or I'll look up, buddy's schedule, because I don't honestly know how their team's doing right now. But, they're in Milwaukee. Like, hey, have you gotten to go to X place while you're there today? But you take that initiative to build them in, and then they want to buy in and be in that inner circle. And they get to know you as a person, and it explains more why your work is the way that it is, because all of our work is a reflection of who we are individually.
Noah, was your dad your first part of your inner circle? And I'm going to guess here. I'm going to guess that he was very honest with you.
Who? He sucked. He's out. He kicked out of it. It's actually only Marv Albert now.
Yes.
Yes. Good Lord. He's been everything for me. And it wasn't just for a broadcasting perspective. It's everything. I mean, he's the exact father mentor I could ask for. If I had went to him and told him I wanted to be a marine biologist, he would have said, that's what you're going to do. And because that's what his father told him when he was really young. Again, I used the really young, when he was maybe 7, went up to his dad and told him he wanted to be a broadcaster. And he always told me that the most crucial thing that his parents did would make him believe that he was going to do it. They didn't ever say like, oh, it's a difficult, that's not a traditional. They always said, that's fine. Now, part of the reason was they were performers themselves. My grandfather was a comedian and actor. My grandmother was a singer. So in their mind, it was normal. But for him, that gave him the inner confidence to go out and really express himself. So he did the same for me. But yeah, he was honest from day one. And anytime I needed any sort of advice, not just how do I sound, how do I make this sound better, but how do I approach this type of relationship? How do I approach this type of situation? I haven't received a payment yet for this job I worked. How do I email someone with a correct wording of an email without sounding over the top? Little things like that I feel like make a huge difference. And both him and my mom, for that matter, because here's another great example. So I interviewed with the Clippers, and for most people, I feel like this is just where my parents kind of thought that extra mile, and they always instilled this in me, and they always remembered when people did it for them. And so most people you interview, and you probably email the people you interviewed with thanking them for the opportunity. So I did that. But then I took it a step further and I wrote personalized thank you notes and sent them to everybody that I interviewed with, because in my mind, anytime I got a written thank you note from someone, it always was stuck in my mind that person took the time out of their day to write a thank you note and send it to them. And that was something that my dad and my mom, for that matter, both said, like, it makes a difference. And I think it will make you stand out a little bit more. And so it's things like that, more so than even just the broadcast, that they mean to me. But again, with the Syracuse aspect, and I know I could push Syracuse all day. I talked to a lot of aspiring high school broadcasters about it who are thinking about it. Just the connections that you get as being a part of the Newhouse name, and more importantly, the WAER name, the radio station at Cuse, it opens your doors up to so many people that if you just say you're affiliated with them, they're willing to take the time to listen to your work. So aside from my father, I've had a variety of people, including Matt, listen to or watch a lot of the stuff that I would do in the past. And I was always open to any sort of criticism or anything that I could include or incorporate. And as Geoff mentioned earlier, my goal for right now with the Clippers is to be better each broadcast I go. I want the next one to be better than the previous. And if I do that, I feel like I'm doing everything I can to give the best product possible. So I know that I kind of rambled on in a bunch of different directions, but yes, my father was definitely important. It wasn't just him. It's a lot of people, and I hope that I can pay it forward as well.
So Geoff, kind of what Noah is saying, it is important to be coachable, correct?
It's probably the most important thing, because I certainly don't have all the answers. And if I did, I probably would have stopped listening to my tapes or watching my tapes back a long time ago. But, to me, the best kind of advice that you can get from somebody is tangible advice that you can use to correct something or fix something. Like, I think we all need a little bit of a push every once in a while. I mean, we've all been in that spot where it's not going well. We're forcing everything. Am I ever going to get my opportunity? And I've been there, a lot. And I think it's just human nature. But I guess I eventually realized that the only thing I can really control is just how do I sound every broadcast. So that's why the inner circle that I kind of mentioned, and like Mel talked about, and like what Noah mentioned as well, is for me, it's a very organic group. And Dave, Stan Cotton is one of our really good friends, and Stan's been the voice of the Demon Deacons for a long time. And Stan is, in addition to being a great mentor of mine, Stan is one of my best friends, and we talk a lot. And plenty of times our conversations are not about broadcasting, but about life and his exploits at home and different things that he's got going on at the radio ranch, as he likes to call it. And then, the same thing true with a lot of the other people. I mean, our producer with Dawn, who is does our game broadcast at Masson. I mean, we caught up for 50 minutes on Friday, and she was telling me about what her daughter was doing and some different house projects that she was doing. John Brickley is one of my best friends, in addition to being somebody that's a big part of my network. And just starting with, like, it's not about what can you do for me, how can you help me with my career. It's about just getting to know them on a personal level first. And with John, I met him at a basketball game that I was there just to hang out with a friend, and we caught up afterwards. We had a college, one of his former college roommates is a mutual friend of ours. And so we talked for a little while, and then he said, "Hey, if you're up in this area, come on by Bristol, and I'll give you a tour." And so I went to ESPN, checked it out. Just got to visit a bunch of different things and go on campus there, which was fun. And then we maybe would talk like once a week, and then it became once a day, sometimes twice a day. And I was at his wedding over the last summer, and the wedding party, and like all kinds of different things. So. In addition to like the people that have like helped me out the most, I consider most of them, among my best friends, people that are really important to me, and the people that I'd want to hang out with and get to know and spend time with, regardless of what they were doing. If John came to me tomorrow and said, "Hey, I don't want to do this broadcasting anymore," it wouldn't change our relationship whatsoever, because those kinds of things are just too valuable, at least to me.
Perfect. Let's take some questions from the folks who are joining us. You can either hit the hand raise icon on your screen there, or you can send a chat message. Bijan Todd is already unmuted. He's ready. I told him he was number one. So Bijan, how are you?
Doing good, Dave. Thank you. And thank you, Geoff, Noah, and Melanie for doing this. We really appreciate it. So I'm Bijan. I'm one of Dave's, now I'm one of Dave's former students. I took his class at Wake Forest, just graduated a couple weeks ago. And I'd be happy to talk to you about that for hours. But so I just did a season of Wake Forest play-by-play ice hockey. And like I said, I graduated. I'm trying to put a reel together and trying to break into the business. And I was just wondering what advice any of you would have for someone like me who just graduated. And I know it's weird in this time with the pandemic and everything, but any advice you guys would have for someone who's trying to break into the business, what the first steps would be to take and everything like that. And this goes to any of the three of you.
I guess I could start because I'm probably the closest in age and the closest experience of someone who just finished school up. First of all, thank you for coming on, Bijan, and sharing your story. I would say that the big thing right now, as you mentioned, now is kind of difficult just as a timing thing and with everything going. And I feel for you, by the way, with just kind of how everything timed out. But for right now, I think it sounds like you're doing a lot of the right things, which is get the reel together, make sure all of your things are in the right place and you're organized. And then you're even just joining this call is a good first step in the right direction, making sure that you're staying in contact with people that you've met over your 4 years at Wake Forest and feeling out what is available potentially, certainly post-pandemic. And I've been telling a lot of people this as well, with the fact that everything's shut down at the same time, especially in the sports world. When it does return, there's going to be an influx of opportunity as a result of it because everything's going to return at one time, and people who potentially did multiple things throughout the 12-month calendar are going to be tied down to one, which is going to open up potentially a different opportunity. So if hockey is something that you covet and that's something that you want to get into, something that you can do just on your own to improve as a broadcaster, go back and watch or listen to hockey broadcasters that you appreciate, that you respect, that you, every time they're on the game, you say, I like what they did there, and take out a legal pad or take out a notebook and just jot down what you like, what you didn't like, and start to think about, okay, how could I incorporate this into my own style? Because I always tell people, like right now, if that was what you wanted to do with basketball, go and watch Mike Green call a game and listen to some of the things and the cadences and the storylines he says. If you want to be on TV and you want to be a host, go watch Bob Costas and Mike Tirico or whoever connect with their audience. And so taking those bits and pieces and incorporating it. The other way is, I mean, this is just something you can do on your own again to improve and make sure you're at your tip-top performance by the time you're ready to go again. Pop on an old game of players that you already know that you don't necessarily have to do the full preparation for, and just call the first period or the first 10 minutes of footage into your phone. Listen back to it. What do you like? What don't you like? Edit those things out and always be your own toughest critic at the end of the day. And then the main thing, which I kind of already mentioned, is just start to reach out to other people in the industry already and figure out what makes the most sense for me. People you respect, like Dave Gorin, who probably has a wealth of knowledge for college kids. Actually, look at what's going on behind it. I don't really know what kind of knowledge there actually is there. But behind it being he's somebody you can trust. He's somebody who has your own best interest in mind and someone that you can bounce ideas off of. So those are the things, at least in my short experience and more recent college experience, that I would go with.
Thank you.
To kind of piggyback off what Noah was saying, that's actually one of the things that I've done since I have been back. I did 7 spring broadcasts. I did 1 on Masson, and then I did 6 radio games. And I worked with a lot of different people, including Mel, and everybody has a different style. And it's sort of what I learned is you're kind of required to do some different things around different folks. Like the way I do a game with Mel might be a little bit different than how I work a game with Brian Roberts. And how I do a game with Brian might be a little bit different than how I would do a game with somebody like Mike Bordick. Kevin Brown and I got to know each other a little bit, but unfortunately we didn't get to do any games together in spring. But that's a great advice. And I've gone back and I've critiqued stuff, and I actually have a pad, and I looked at some of my basketball work, and I wrote down a bunch of things. And some was good, and and there were some other things that I wrote down. I was like, no, don't do this. You're doing too much of that. And so it gives me something that I can go back and look at. In terms of putting a reel together, reels it sort of depends on the person that is looking at it and what they want and what they're looking for. There have been times where if I knew the person that was hiring, and I had this experience with the Orioles when they reached out to me, the guy who's now my boss, he told me what he wanted, and that's what I gave him. But somebody else, another job that I didn't get before that, I knew the PD for a long time, and I straight up asked him. We went to lunch, and I said, Scott, what do you want me to give you? And he straight up just told me, and so that's what I gave him. So, I think any reel, if you've got some highlights, that's great. If it's like, and I'll just go off the baseball example because hockey, I really haven't done too much hockey, but like for a baseball example, like I don't want to hear a million home run calls. Like I know you can do a home run. I want to hear like some kind of like variety. Like if you do a home run call, like how do you call a triple? How do you call a double play? How do you call a play that's not routine? Showcasing that. And then maybe having a stretch that's like, it could be an entire inning. If it's basketball, it could be from like one media timeout to the next media timeout. And if they want some more, they'll probably tell you that. But just, focus on, I'd say, quality over quantity, and realize that if you put a reel together, it's not all going to be perfect. Like I had to submit a couple of games, and the two that I submitted on the radio side of the Orioles, there were some things that I went back and listened to. I'm like, well, I hope they don't hear that. But like they're realistically not going to listen to every second of every game. But if you have an opportunity to maybe ask the person what they want, that can be really helpful in giving them what they're looking for, as opposed to sending them something that they either don't like or don't want.
Yeah, and I want to add to what Geoff said just there for a minute. If you don't know somebody with an organization that you do land an interview with, don't be afraid to reach out to other people who have previously worked with the organization, or maybe they work for them, but they're not in the broadcasting department, because those people have still been a part of it, and they still know ultimately at the end of the day what's going to make the tapestry of that organization and what they really pride themselves on, what their biggest commitments are to, and the character qualities that they look at the most. Don't be afraid to think outside of the box when it comes to those resources and the ability to connect with people when you get interviews. And I'll add to that, something I wish I had known back in the day when I was getting ready to graduate that might have made my path a little easier on me, but I don't regret my path nonetheless, is just, again, being open to where it takes you. I tell kids that I mentor all the time this: if there's a news station that gives you the opportunity to work in sports, don't be afraid to at least take the interview. Go see what they're about. I interviewed at multiple stations, but it was 5-6 years removed from college, and there were kids coming right out that could do 10 times what I was capable of doing, just because their classes had already stepped up to the new technology, to the new equipment, and all the changes that were being made. But they do give you real avenues to get into live sports broadcasting. Stations are not the end all be all. It's not that they'll block you from ever becoming a part of a team. What that affords you right now is an opportunity. And in some situations, a year of security and knowing you have a job and knowing you have consistent work and also consistent reps. And they're hiring. I've seen multiple people right now who are taking jobs with TV stations. And when you do look at those, don't limit yourself geographically, because I think that's another thing that kind of ties a lot of people's hands is, I only want to stay in the Southeast, or I don't want to move out of my home state, or I want to stay in New York. I want to be here. I've lived in places that you can't find on a map. I've lived in places that I didn't know they existed until I packed up and moved out and was like, all right, population of 100. Like, what can we do here? But you make the most of those experiences, and it teaches you to get comfortable with being outside of your comfort zone and to get to know the people you're working with and how to build those relationships. And they're the ones that are going to make those places memorable to you at the end of the day. And while you're doing all of this looking and searching and figuring out where you want to be, create your own content. Geoff mentioned Kevin earlier, and he's one of our favorites. I mean, like, I'm going to go ahead and admit it, but just that the personality he has is so out there. Right now, while we're all at home, is the perfect opportunity to self-generate content And the stuff that people are coming up with is absolutely wild. And I've only seen, a lot of it on the baseball end just because that's my realm, but they're calling backyard baseball video games as games, or, he's going in and taking like a team from 1907 and a team from 2016 and putting against each other and then calling the game as if those two lineups were actively playing right now. So it takes a little creativity, and I would definitely suggest if you do self-create that content, give it the honor of thinking it through, building a plan, knowing what you're going to do instead of just going live and being like, I'm going to fumble around and see where this goes. Because if you execute it well enough, you really could land not only something that you enjoy doing while pretty much everybody's stuck at home right now, but that could catch someone's eye and say, look, this kid doesn't have anything to work with right now. He's at home like the rest of us, but he's putting out product, he's putting out content, and that's an opportunity for our organization to have quality in times where a lot of people can't find anything.
And actually, to kind of just piggyback off of that from Melanie, just the last point, this was something my dad always used to tell me, especially last year when I was getting ready to graduate. Two things. One was the most difficult thing really as a broadcaster is that first job, is getting that first job. And once you do, everything else starts to become a little easier because somebody's already taken a chance on you and you are now hireable because somebody has already hired you. The second thing he would always say to me is, and this was just before, this was maybe February, like when I was starting to think about future jobs, he always used to say, don't worry about what the first job is because it'll whatever it is, it's going to be whatever it's meant to be. But remember that the first job isn't your forever job. It's just your first job. And you can always switch to something else and do something else. So whatever opportunity comes your way, you want to say yes, and you want to take that opportunity and then make the most of it. So I do think that some great points that Melanie made as well.
One thing I've been telling a lot of the recent college grads that I've been talking to is A, be patient, B, tell your parents to be patient. This is these are times unlike we've ever seen. I was very fortunate. I had very patient parents because it took me forever to get a job. But there are just no jobs right now. So until the economy comes back, tell your folks just relax. I'm good enough. I mean, as long as you are confident in your own abilities, and I think everybody on here should be, I wouldn't worry about it too much. Robert Eggleston, you want to unmute and ask your question there?
I was just curious in y'all's world, is it more or less pressure working in a major league versus a minor? And clearly none of you are resting on your laurels, but do you have newfound confidence now that you're at the top of at least this mountain?
I would say that it took a little bit of time. Like, I think when you're in the major leagues and maybe it's your first season, at least this has been my experience. Like, no, I don't know what you thought about this. And no, I don't know what your thought was when you did some stuff at spring, is that I think I probably think about what I'm saying a little bit more, at least at the beginning. I'm still confident in what I'm saying, and I'm not maybe like in the moment, like overanalyzing it, but maybe when I go back afterwards and I look at what I'm saying, it's kind of, you maybe think about it in a little bit different terms than when you do in the minor leagues. And I guess the difference is that in the minors, if you say something stupid, there are not a lot of people that are going to hear it. And if they do hear it, they probably won't say anything to you on social media about it. Versus once you start doing games in the major leagues, if they don't like you or they have something against you or they hate what you're saying, they will just tag you on Twitter and be like, I think you suck, or just something like that. So there's definitely, it's a little bit of a different vibe, I would say. But I think it's a reminder to you that you have to work to be better. And when I was doing an interview right after I got this position, this guy who was doing the interview is somebody I've known for a while, and he just started listing off all the different previous Orioles broadcasters. And I was like, and I'm mentally like, as he's listing them off, I was like, okay, he's in the Hall of Fame. He's in the Hall of Fame. He's going to be in the Hall of Fame. He's a possible Hall of Famer. And I'm just like, okay, we probably need to bring it every day. And it's your reminder that this is where you wanted to be, and you kind of lived the dream and you got there, but now what are you going to do with it? you have to work at it every day. It's like no days off. It's the big leagues. Every game is important. Every spring training game is important. And you have to bring it every day, and you can't let off the gas pedal at all.
And I'll add with Geoff on that. Geoff, I think it's funny. You're like, oh, I had these spring training games. I'm like, I had one. And then we were waiting for the second, and then spring training ended. So that's fine. But I do agree with him. And I think to a point too, having been a part of different organizations and this being my first year as a whole in the Baltimore system, it's also being conscious that, yeah, I'm not changing who I am as a person by any means, but I also know that I was with Boston last year and how Boston perceives things and how Baltimore perceives things and what they attach to and what means more to them. That changes. And you have to give that the respect that it deserves, because they've chosen to have you as a voice for this team and as that communication. The pressure has kind of been a funny thing, because when I first started in 2010, there was a lot of pressure about females and females don't do this and blah, 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 blah. And the trolls on the internet like ran amok. But I will say that has tremendously gone down over the years. So while the pressure for the whole gender thing has gone down, you have that increase in pressure for, okay, now I'm going to start ascending to new levels. Now I'm going to have to prove why these people brought me on in the first place. And I don't want to do a disservice to that. But you really do have to take it in that game by game, one day at a time situation, because you start overthinking things. That's when the anxiety sets in. That's when you get a little bottled up and things start coming out the way that you don't intend them to, because now you're overthinking everything. So you have to know who you are and the work that you've been putting in. And again, just going back on leaning on that inner circle that's around you. And I'm fortunate that one of them has been with me last year and is now with me this year, literally in the same job. And just know that they're going to have your back. And if you do say something or do something where they're like, okay, let's modify that a little bit, or let's do this. I had a couple bloopers in our first game together, but that was my major league debut. It's the day you've dreamed of since you were a little kid. Like, yeah, you kind of want to hyperventilate a little bit, and you're going to mess up some of your words. Nobody bats 1,000. And just taking that constructively at the end of the day, that, all right, got it. This is how we fix it. This is how we get better. This is how we better promote this team's message. Let's go.
I think both of those answers were incredibly well put, and I do want to apologize to Geoff for telling him he sucks on Twitter. Here's my whole thing with the idea of pressure and everything. I think Geoff nailed it, where I was coming from Syracuse, and sure, a station like WAER in particular has a lot of history, and you can rattle off those names. As you said, Robert, I am a Syracuse suck-up. I'll rattle off all the names that have worked there, the Bob Costas through Mike Tirico and Marv Albert. So you're trying to uphold that legacy of all those people who have come before you, sure. But if you screw up, at the end of the day, you're still a college student and you're still learning and you're still trying to get better. And that's why we're all there at Syracuse. So when I get to this level with the Clippers, my whole mindset is, well, I can't screw up because everyone's listening. And especially in LA, I learned that being in LA is probably one of the better radio markets in the country, because everybody's stuck in traffic 24/7 and they're in their cars. So I get a lot of people who listen. And so here I have a couple examples, but before I get to that, I will say this. And John, I mentioned John's on this call, and he could probably attest to this as well. I was talking to Ed Cohen. Yes, Dave.
No, hang on one sec. I want to interrupt. I have to get my son into an Airbnb at the beach. They won't let him in. So I'm going to call him. I'll let you tell that story and go as long as you like.
You got it.
That's a first, Dave. Way to go.
So before the season starts, the NBA puts together broadcast meetings, which I'm sure most leagues do. And so we were all in Jersey City this year, Jersey City, New Jersey. So I came back home, and I remember I was sitting and meeting all the other broadcasters who I didn't really know yet. And Ed Cohen had been the younger guy. He's the radio voice for the New York Knicks. He's in his early 30s, just had his first kid. So giving you that background, I guess I didn't need to do that. He's got red hair. I'm trying to give him a full physical description. But Ed, I sat down with Ed, and I remember saying, Ed, what kind of advice, like what do I need to know going in, basically? And he said, well, the biggest thing that you should keep in mind is that your first broadcast is going to be way worse than your 65th broadcast, which is going to be way worse than your 82nd broadcast. And you just got to know in your mind and your heart that each one you're going to get better. And you're going to listen back in year 3 or 4, if you keep doing this, to year 1 and be like, did I really sound like that? Is that really how I said this? And so I like to tell this story of our training camp, and I was very appalled when I heard where our training camp was in Hawaii. And I quit on the spot, and then they convinced me to come back. And so we're in Hawaii. Our first game was against the Houston Rockets. So this was the first ever NBA broadcast that I was doing on the radio. And by the way, I don't have an analyst, and I had never done that before at Syracuse. So I'm doing these games by myself. This is the first game I ever did by myself. And we're playing the Houston Rockets. And I swear to you, there were more fouls called in that game than any game I've ever watched. And there were more free throws taken in that game than any game I've ever watched. And if you're on the radio by yourself, you have to fill all that time. It might have been the longest game I've called all year. And so I remember finally getting off, and I was exhausted. I was like, is that how it's going to be every single game? And our television guy, Brian Seaman, who had been the radio guy for the previous 12 years, came up to me right after the game, and he said, look, and we're kind of going through this experience together of newer positions, trying to make sure that we fit in. And Brian is replacing an absolute legend in Ralph Lawler, who is beloved by the entire city of Los Angeles and the Clipper fan base. And so he looked me in the eye and he said, look, that will be the most difficult game you call all season. The rest is going to be downhill. And I said, please, thank you. That's fantastic. And I looked down to the team I had been preparing for 2 nights later, and it was the Shanghai Sharks. The Shanghai Sharks had some of the most difficult names I possibly could have been given. But hey, I sat in my hotel room and I studied for hours on exactly how to perfect the pronunciation of every single one of those players. And I got there and I felt confident that I had been through that day, the other day, 2 days earlier, the longest game potentially in preseason history. And I sit down, and one of my bosses sits down next to me and says, you have an extra headset? I said, yeah. They said, all right, cool, we're going to listen in. My 2 bosses, my 2 direct bosses at the Clippers, decided to sit down and listen to me call the Clippers versus the Shanghai Sharks. So in that moment, I said, all I have to do is not throw up on myself, and I'm good. And that's all I did. I got through the game. They both said they liked what they heard, and from that point on, it gave me the confidence that, okay, you know what? I know that they're okay with how I'm doing it. I'm okay with how I'm doing it, and my goal now is to improve with each broadcast as I go. And I feel like I have, and Ed's sentiment was completely 100% true. I see David Halberstam is here too, and he can attest to it. Longtime broadcaster in the NBA as well. Just by doing it and having back-to-backs or 3 games in 4 days and going through the full course, and we didn't get the full 82 games. We got 65 or so through. But having done plus the 4 preseason I did, so nearly 70 games, I could tell you my tape right now is leaps and bounds better than it was when I started. And that's okay. And I know that I want that to be the case as I continue to move forward. So I try not to put too much pressure on myself to be absolutely perfect every time, because I know I'm not going to be. But as long as I don't throw up on the air, I feel good.
As it turns out, I did not have to call to get my son into the beach house. But thank you, Noah, for filling all that time. Richard Broad has a question. Richard?
First of all, Melanie, you mentioned working with Bob Rathbun. He is a terrific guy. I've worked with him covering ACC and other college soccer. And the man, whether he's doing Atlanta Hawks or baseball or whatever, he is just the best person to work with. So give him my best. And I wanted to ask Melanie, both you and Geoff, and I guess, Noah, you can chime in on this as well. First of all, for the Orioles, what are you two going to do when they start blaming you for the number of games that are won? It's a little different from the Red Sox. And at least my real question, with each of you, what kind of pressures do you feel to sort of boost the home team? And you're affiliated with that team, you know them the best, but what's your role? How do you see it? Was that defined, in your conversations with Steve Ballmer, with you guys that are with the Orioles, Geoff and Melanie? What kind of pressures do you feel in that, and how do you approach that angle?
I guess I'll start. when I got hired by the Orioles, they told me right off the bat that we want somebody that is going to be doing radio every day, and you're the person that's going to be doing that. So they kind of told me the number of games that I was going to be doing. It's about 150 until the current situation took over, and so I guess we'll have to see what happens, how many games we're going to play. I mean, that's still very much up for grabs. The good news for me and the Orioles, like they're probably going to be at the very bottom of baseball, and given the fact that you're looking at realignment with the AL East and the NL East, that very well might mean they're going to have the number 1 overall pick next year, just because they're in a rebuilding mode, and it's just, at some point it comes down to who has the better guys, and unfortunately for us, we're just in a spot where some of our best guys are in the minor leagues right now. But I have a lot of experience doing games for teams that don't play very well. The Orioles as an organization in the minor league level last year had a lot of teams that were really good, one of which had the best record in all of minor league baseball, second which had the best record in the Gulf Coast League, another one got to the playoffs. We were over 30 games under 500 last year, and we lost games in every way imaginable.
Yep.
To the point of where it was, Mel was on hand for a lot of that. We would lose, and we would not lose quickly, put it that way. So I've become very accustomed to doing games where our teams don't do very well. The only winning season I ever had in the minors is my first one, and my boss at the time said, "Enjoy this, because this might be the best team that you ever have in the minors." And from there, the next 7 years was just lose. So I have a lot of experience having to fill time and make it interesting. And I think I'm fortunate that I know a lot of the guys on our team. So that'll certainly help. And I can tell some stories that maybe I've learned over time that people haven't heard before. I think it's just trying to make it an interesting broadcast. We work with some great analysts who you can get them to talk about their playing days. People in Baltimore, from talking to some people in the city about it, they really like to hear stories about Orioles history and some different things like that. And we work with a lot of guys who can provide those kinds of stories. And so I think trying to get the most out of them while also passing along some anecdotal stuff will be key, especially when you realize that, the Orioles, I think, will win at some point, but it just may not be this year or next year.
Let me ask real quick. I want to know what pressures you receive from the hierarchy. I don't want you sounding almost like you're Bob Uecker in Major League here. Trying, it's not too bad. I mean, we're still going to play next week unless the owner sells a team. But what kind of pressures do you feel to paint the team? I'm not saying to be a homer, but to put the spin on it, because you believe it or not, you have fans in Baltimore who still believe and can remember Brooks Robinson and those people, Palmer and et cetera. But what kind of pressures do you feel from the front office?
Not really any. When I met with the people that ended up bringing me on board, they know where they are, and they understand the reality is that it is what it is right now. And if it's an 11 or 12 nothing game in the third inning or fourth inning or whatever, there's no point in just harping on how bad it is or anything like that. That's when you need to get into the mode of, how do I make this interesting, and how do I keep my audience engaged? And in a spot like that, that's what you have to do. And they said to me, like, we know that you're going to have to be honest. You'll have to tell the truth. You can't sugarcoat something that just isn't that good. But I think it's a lot of just, if you have to be critical, criticize the performance, not the performer, and just be honest and realistic about it. And then, once you make your point, just move on. And from there, just try and make it as interesting as it can be if it isn't a good game. But for the most part, just keep it about the game until it gets to the point where the game is no longer going to carry you. And that's when you have to tell stories and fill time and do the things that will keep people listening and having fun and just enjoying the broadcast.
And I'll add to
go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, you're good. I was going to add to what Geoff said with that. In addition to our front office being like, look, we know where we're at right now. We're really fortunate that the fans also know where we're at right now. There's no grand illusion here that we're going to come out and be the Rays and all of a sudden have this turnaround season and just take everything away, and having fans that are very realistic about where their team is, but who also still have hope. Like, yeah, it's not going to be a great year, but those good years are in the future. You know, we can already see the light at the end of the tunnel, and we see what Elias is doing right now to build this team. It does give us that little bit of room and grace. I think people are finally starting to get away from every home broadcaster has to be a homer. I think people do want that dose of reality, and they want to know, you know, exactly what's going on with their team right now. And like Geoff said, the benefit is knowing these guys and having these stories you can tell so that you don't completely derail and get away from the game and fans don't even know what they're tuning into anymore. But you have these little anecdotes to kind of weave in between the strikeouts and leaving men on base that keep them engaged. And I've never had a good minor league team that I got to be a part of. I've gone to the playoffs twice, and can kind of speak to the whole joke of the nation where they're like, don't trust a 2-0 lead in the series, because that's what happened to us. We blew the doors off after settling for a near franchise worst first half record, had a second half that couldn't be put out until we beat the doors off for 2 straight games, and then we couldn't find the final out of a game to advance for 3 games, and we got knocked out. But what that encourages is going to these places, and the reality is that major and minor leagues, it's a little different, but they can't always travel. So looking up the history, why is a stadium named after this person? What significant impact did they do? What's fun to do around the stadium? What are the cool things to eat at the ballpark? Giving fans a taste of that on-road experience and just different things that still tie to the game is a huge way to keep it going when the losses are piling up.
That's great advice. Thank you. Now, next question, I think it's going to be our last question, Joe Harrison. But Joe, before you ask it, stand up so you can see him.
Oh, whoa.
There he is. He's our new intern. He interned for me when he was in high school, back when our office was in Salisbury, and he was a senior at North Rowan High School, and now he is a rising senior at Belmont Abbey College and is making the drive from Salisbury here to Winston-Salem. So, Joe, you're up. Go ahead.
All right. Thank you guys for being here. My question would be, I guess, geared more towards Noah, being that I think you're the youngest play-by-play guy in the NBA right now. So as a guy who's obviously got 1 more year left in college, and then I'll start applying for jobs and going for interviews and stuff, what would be the biggest thing that you did to prepare for your interview in order to really sell yourself? Because obviously, like, being so young, LA in a way is taking a chance on you to come in and do their play-by-play. So what did you do for that process to really, like, sell yourself to them, leave no doubt that you were the guy for the job?
For sure. It's a good question, and I know I've said it a few times already, but I got really fortunate on a variety of ways. One of them being that the organization that took interest in me is very forward-thinking, and they're willing to take a chance. And so when Steve Ballmer, and you hear a lot about Steve Ballmer, he's a very inclusive owner, and he lets people do their jobs and make their decisions. And so he basically told his team, hey, give me all the options possible. I want young, old, in between. I want little experience, a ton of experience, all of it. And we're going to narrow it down from there. And so I was just included, and I wasn't the only young name included. There were other names with the same age as me, and I just happened to be the one that they chose to come out and interview. And so for the actual process, which is more of your question, Joe, the thing for me, and the thing that my dad told me before I got into it, before I was really heading out to LA and actually going, he said, at some point, you can't just go and answer their questions. At some point, any interview is you convincing the person that you're the right person, you showing them that you're the right person for that job. And so for me, I looked at what LA has done recently. Vin Scully retires, Joe Davis takes over. Joe's very young, and Joe has done a great job. Bob Miller retires, Alex Faust takes over. Alex is very young, and Alex does a great job. So we're looking at the Clippers with Ralph Lawler, who had been there for 40 years, and again, legend, did a fantastic job with some awful teams. He retires. So if you want to continue in the trend of the LA markets and what they've done, and by the way, those two that I had already mentioned, Joe and Alex, are beloved by their fan bases, and they're beloved by the city of Los Angeles. Vin started with the Dodgers, and Vin is one of the most famous broadcasters, if not the most famous broadcaster ever. He is an absolute living, walking legend. He started with the Dodgers when he was 22. So there were areas to point to and say, look, this is what's happened in your city here. Make it happen and be different and go against the grain. And I will do my best to prove that you made the right decision. And so I kind of went with that angle of it, of LA has become a city of young broadcasters for their local teams, and they allow for those broadcasters to grow alongside their teams. I also did tell them that if you hire me, I'll get Kawhi Leonard and Paul George to want to join your team. And that was the selling point, really. They felt really good after I left with that information. But the other thing that I helped to prove is that I think it was important as somebody who's young to prove that I don't necessarily think like a young person, if that makes sense. Like I might be 23, but I tend to say that I'm trapped in almost a 55-year-old's body where my interests kind of wane out, and I love TV, movies, and pop culture. And so I made sure that they knew my love for that helps me connect with people of all ages. So I gave them examples of people that I've worked with in the past. I said, I worked the Junior NBA Global Championships the last couple of years. And during that time, I've worked with a variety of people. And some of them were young, and the kids were 13 and 14 years old. But I worked with Vince Carter and Donnie Marshall, who were in their 40s, and I could connect with them because we had similar interests in movies. We would start quoting Coming to America out of nowhere. So I made those types of examples of reasons that I felt I could connect with anybody within the staff, but I could also connect to the players anywhere from 22 or even 18 up to 44. And I don't know, I guess I gave them enough belief in me, and I was saying it with enough conviction that they believed what I was saying. Here's the second and more important part, though. And I think most people go on interviews, and this is my interview with Steve Ballmer is what I'm talking about now. Most people go on interviews, and let's say it's Steve Ballmer, who has $50 billion to his name. He's one of the most famous people and honestly one of the most interesting men in the world, in my opinion. I sat down with Steve, and what stuck out to me was that he asked me a lot of questions about his own curiosity of broadcasting. And he didn't want me to say what I thought he wanted me to say, if that makes sense. What I decided was I'm not just going to say something because I think this is what this guy wants to hear. I'm going to say something that I truly believe. I'm just going to say what is honest. I'm not going to bend my truth. And so an example of this was actually kind of to the last question that Richard brought up. He asked, okay, I'm a firm believer that the broadcaster should be swayed almost towards a homer. He said, I look at things like CNN and Fox News, and they get these great ratings because they're catering towards the group that they know they're catering towards. And as a result, they bring in all of those people. And I said, sure, that's a great example. But here's the thing. If I was a fan, let's say I'm a Clipper fan and I go to a Clipper game and I sit down, and this is what I'm saying to him. And in my mind, I'm thinking this would totally screw me for this job. But I also said to myself, if I end up getting the job and I didn't tell the truth and now I'm having to do something I don't believe in, that's not right either. So I decided to say, look, I disagree, honestly. I personally do. I feel that if it's a great play and the other team makes that great play, I need to call it that it was a great play. So here's an example of then what happened. And there's checks and balances here. There's a fine line to walk as a broadcaster. But one of our preseason games again, we were playing a team from Australia. And they had a guy who went to Maryland who was a star, Mello Trimble, on their team. And I'm calling the game. And one of my bosses comes up and she says, hey, I just want to let you know Steve is listening. He's loving what he's hearing. But he said, don't go too strong on Australia. Because Mello Trimble was killing them in the first quarter of the game. He had like 15 points by the end of the first. And I'm going nuts like, oh, Mello Trimble. And I'm thinking, wait a second. No, this isn't what people need to hear. And so what I learned is it's walking a fine line. So fast forward a few weeks into the season, we're playing the Boston Celtics. And Jason Tatum at the end of the game breaks Paul George's ankle, steps back, and hits a game-tying three with seconds remaining in regulation. I wasn't going to go, Tatum steps back, and he made the three. Because in my mind, if I'm a fan that's sitting there, I'm going to react to that three either way. Even if I'm a Clipper fan, I'm going to react. My initial just human reaction is going to be, whoa, and then I'm going to go, oh. So I thought my broadcaster reaction has to be, whoa, and then bring it back. Okay, here's why it's going to be okay for the Clippers, and remember that tone that Clipper fans are probably taking. So I say all this to go back to the interview. If I hadn't told Steve that, and if I hadn't told him the truth, one, I think he probably would have sniffed me out because he's ridiculously smart. Two, if I still got the job, I wouldn't have been able to then continue with that mindset because I don't believe in it. And three, I do think he respected me more for not just going with what I thought he wanted to hear and actually telling what I believed and looking him in the eye and doing all those things. And then to go back to my earlier point, the thing that can set yourself apart, it's a small little piece that people don't think of, but I wrote those handwritten notes, and I really do think that it made me stand out a little bit more because it's something most people just wouldn't think of. So those long answer with a variety of directions, but that's kind of my sentiment.
Let me say thank you to everybody, especially Noah, Geoff, and Melanie for joining us. Appreciate it. I know once we get back to playing games, I will be on the radio and on TV listening for all of you. Thank God for Sirius XM, because I don't think, Noah, even though you're a probably clear channel, I probably couldn't get you here in North Carolina.
No, you need three different ways. Sirius XM is probably the easiest. Tune in or the NBA Audio League Pass. Feel free to subscribe.
Very good. I'm glad you have all those down. So without further ado, thank you all. And don't forget to join us on Thursday at 4. Steve Hers is going to tell you everything you need to know about when and if you need an agent and how you should improve your communication skills. I know it's worked with Noah. So, ciao, everyone. Enjoy dinner. Thank you.
Guys.
See you, everybody.